Well, hey, church, welcome to the bonus content of part 7 of our Holy Ground series. And yes, we talked about this past week. We talked about your finances are holy ground. But let me stop here because this is really a continuation of our sermon from this past weekend. So if you did not yet hear your finances are holy ground, pause this video and go listen to that part. Otherwise, none of this is going to make sense because I'm continuing really what we talked about this past weekend. And so we're talking about money. Now, we mentioned this in our message, but Jesus talked a lot about money, but not always in the way that we think he did or that churches do now. And so we realize that there's a relationship not just between you and the church, which is the focus of a lot of churches preaching on money, but there's a relationship between you and God that's far more important. And we shared some outlines and some guidelines about helping understand the rules of God's economy. And so today I want to talk through that story we shared about those servants with 5 talents, with 2 talents, with 1 talent. And remember, that story is not about the numbers. It was about the heart toward the master and managing the resources that God gave them. But I want to share just in this extra content time how to avoid being the 1 talent manager. If you remember in that story in Matthew 25, the 1 talent manager was the one that was condemned the most by the master. And that master said, "You've been evil, you've been wicked, you have not carefully managed the resources, the money, the finances that I gave you." And as a result, that 1 talent manager was banished. And really, when we think about this idea of finances, this is not just about a bank account or a credit card limit. This is about managing the resources that God has given to you and he's entrusted to you. So how do we avoid being the 1 talent manager? I want to share with you just pretty quickly 3 simple actions that you and I must take with the resources that God has given to us. And remember, we're not talking about you and the church. We're talking about God and you. So this is how you need to react and move into the resources that God has made you into a manager. And we are to manage our resources. And so let me share these 3 actions with you from Matthew 25. And we find this 1 talent manager, there were 3 things he just did not do. The first thing he did not do was he wasn't sharing generously. You know, he buried his resource in the sand. He just hid it. And he thought, well, I wasn't given a lot, so I don't really need to do a lot. And many times we think, well, my bank account is not super high, so really I don't really need to worry about it. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what your bank account is. As we talked about this past weekend, it's not about the numbers, it's about our heart. Because remember, sometimes we think the church is after your money, but really it's God after your heart. And so we need to be careful that we are sharing generously, that we are being careful, that we are thinking about others. And this 1 talent manager, do you know what he did? He hid his talents in the sand. He wasn't thinking about other people. In fact, John, the disciple with Jesus, he writes in 1 John chapter 3, in verse 17, he says this, "If anyone has this world's goods and sees a fellow believer in need, but withholds compassion from him." Look at this question he writes. "How does God's love reside in him?" And so when we think about this idea of sharing generously as a manager of the resources that God has given to us, the first action we need to not be that 1 talent manager is to share generously. Because John, he goes on to say in verse 18 of 1 John chapter 3, he writes, "Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in action and in truth." And so John is reminding us and says, hey, it's easy to say you love people, but are you sharing generously with other people? And if we're going to avoid being the 1 talent manager, we need to share generously. But there's another action that we don't find this 1 talent manager making, and that was he wasn't saving wisely. You see, we need to share generously, but we also need to save wisely. Think about this manager again. He sees his friends who has 2 talents, double what he has. He sees the other manager with 5 talents, quintuple, whatever the 5 times is of that. I guess I'm not good in math. That's not my strong suit. But whatever the 5 times, 5x of what he had is. And there probably perhaps was some jealousy. Maybe thinking about, man, I wasn't entrusted with those things. So what's going on? But many times we think, well, they have more so they can save more. But it's not about the numbers. It's about our heart and about our actions. And so we save wisely. I love what Solomon writes in Proverbs 21. He says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but the fools, they gulp theirs down." You see, no matter how much food or olive oil in this verse you're given by God, we are still blessed beyond measure. And it is what we do with the little. It's what we do with the much. It's what we do with whatever God's entrusted us that we must save wisely. And Solomon writes, the fools, they gulp theirs down. Have you ever been around somebody who spends every dime they get on their payday? And maybe they don't have any savings because whenever that check hits their direct deposit, boom, they're on a shopping spree. Boom, they're just going out to buy the next toy, the next thing that they think will bring them joy. But really, when we think about this idea of being a one-talent manager, he wasn't sharing generously, and he was not saving wisely. And so if we're going to be careful and manage the resources that God's given to us, then we need to make sure that we are saving wisely. But there's one other action that you and I need to take in the resources that God has given to us. Remember, our finances are holy ground, because the church is not after your money, but God is after your heart. Because Jesus teaches that wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And so the third action I want to share with you is to spend intentionally. Spend intentionally. You see, Luke reminds us, and this was Jesus speaking, but Luke records his speaking where he says this. Jesus is telling us, "For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation and cannot finish it, all of the onlookers will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This man started to build, but wasn't able to finish.'" You see, not only are we going to share generously and we're going to save wisely, but we're going to spend intentionally. The things that we're spending and that we're using our card on, or we're buying for our home or for ourselves or for our family, we need to make sure those are intentional purchases. We need to make sure that there's a reason behind it. Now, I know sometimes we get stressed, we get worried, we get anxious, and so there's a very real need and desire for retail therapy where we go on a shopping spree. And honestly, in the moment, that new purchase, that new clothing or shoes or whatever feels so good in the moment. But it wasn't an intentional purpose, and it certainly wasn't going to bring us a lasting contentment or joy. And so the one-talent manager, the reason he was a one-talent manager, and the reason that you and I can avoid being the one-talent manager, is if we employ, or we rather push these actions into our life. We share generously, we save wisely, and if we spend intentionally, do you know what God's going to do? I can't promise that he's going to give you a bigger bank account or expand your limits and give you more. But what I can promise you is that God's going to count you faithful in what he's given to you. And when we're faithful, the Bible says in little, God's going to make us faithful in much. When we're faithful in our responsibilities, God's going to grow and he's going to give you more to act on, to manage, to lead in, because he trusts you. And so remember, your finances are holy ground. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the church and you. It's about God and you, because God is after your heart. And so let me encourage you, church, whether you have an actual, checkbook that you still maybe balance your checkbook, or maybe you go online, whatever the numbers look like, remember that those are God's numbers, and he's entrusting you to manage the resources that he's given to you. And so let me encourage you, church, this week, how can you make finances more of a holy ground? How can you invite God into your finances? Because that is where he wants to be. He's given you so much. If you live in this country in America, if you have a job, if you have these things that we think are basic, but really are blessings around the world, you and I have been given so much to manage, so much to lead in, that we must be grateful for what God has done for us. And so let me encourage you, your finances, they're holy ground. Don't be the one-talent manager. Make sure that you are using and spending and saving and sharing your money generously, wisely, and intentionally, and God will give you more and more and more. He'll bless you, and you'll see how good and faithful he is by being faithful in what he's already given to you. If you want to go deeper into the study on finances and understanding that finances are holy ground, I want to share with you 3 resources from Right Now Media. If you have not yet signed up for Right Now Media, you can do a free account. It's our gift from the Highlands to you as a thank you for being part of our family. And this is an incredible resource where you can go deeper into your finances. And so I'm going to mention 3 resources, studies that you can look up and search right there in Right Now Media and pull up for free and go deeper into God's Word and how he's called you to be a manager of the resources that he's placed with you. The first one I want to mention is a series called Balanced. It's by Andy Stanley, a well-known pastor in Georgia, and he does a great series on balancing the finances that God's called us to manage. And so you'll be greatly encouraged by that series. There's another one called Financing Your Future. This is by a pastor named Wayne Cordero. He was a Foursquare pastor just like us in Hawaii. And this is more about a 40-minute message that I think you'll enjoy about how do we finance what God's called us to do? How do we finance our kids and our future? And what does that look like moving forward? And it's a great resource for you. And then the last one I want to mention, and this is a powerful book. It's a small book that you can get perhaps on Kindle or maybe another way that you read books, but it's called The Treasure Principle. And this is an incredible, about 70-page book. It's very small, very easy. But this study goes through the book, The Treasure Principle. It's by an author named Randy Alcorn. And it really is about God's treasure in you and how you can manage that treasure. And I'm telling you, all of these studies will bless you, will encourage you, will deepen your faith, it will help you become more rooted. And so as we think about our finances, our holy ground, we want to give God first fruits. We want to give God access to what he's already given to us, because remember, these are not our resources. God owns it all, and we are just managing what he's given to us moving forward. And so I hope these studies will encourage you and strengthen your faith as you give your finances over to the Lord and manage what he's already given to you. Because remember, your finances are holy ground.